All right. Well, hopefully this is recording now. All right. And first, I'd like to apologize for having it in this view. How you can see right now, I was unable to figure out how to make it just a slide without showing my notes. So, yeah. Anyways, my name is Brady Arnold, and I will be presenting sustainable procurement and what I learned from my paper. All right. So, first, we need to start off by answering this question. What is sustainable procurement? Well, according to the United Nations Development Program, or UNDP, sustainable procurement is the method by which a company assures that the products and services they buy are as sustainable as possible, with the lowest environmental impact and most positive social results. The key idea I will be talking about most is companies buying sustainable products and services. But before I get into the good stuff, I want to briefly talk about the history of sustainability and how it became so important for businesses. Sustainability first became popular back in the 1980s when the media and academic circles started to understand that typical daily practices done by humans were detrimental to the earth. Fast forward to the present, and we see climate change protests and we see a lot more research about how the ideas behind sustainability. Along with this, we have seen a larger demand for businesses to adopt more sustainable methods of procurement, production, and transportation. Many businesses have seen the benefit of adopting sustainable practices, and it has become something almost every company strives to achieve. And this leads me to my research questions. All right, so here is a list of all the questions I strive to answer. We have: what are the benefits and barriers of sustainable procurement? To what extent can sustainable practices affect the profitability of a company? How does sustainability entice consumers to have more business with the company? Does sustainable procurement lead to higher quality products? What methods of sustainable procurement provide the best results while also being the cheapest? How can smaller companies that cannot afford to have fully sustainable procurement make baby steps in the right direction without jeopardizing their company? And to what extent can sustainable practices help developing countries? When I chose these questions, I wanted to try and focus on different aspects of sustainable procurement that could be important to a wide range of viewers, whether this be a small company learning a cheap and easy method for sustainability, or an activist who is curious about how sustainable procurement practices can help developing countries. These questions also allowed me to use a wide range of companies with different practices in different industries. For this presentation, I will condense all the questions under two questions, which I believe allow me to refer to my answers for the others. First, let's get started with my very first question. What are the benefits and barriers of sustainable procurement? To start off, I first looked at what the benefits and barriers of sustainable procurement were. A few of the barriers for sustainable procurement are price, lack of knowledge, and resource availability. The one I focused on discussing in my report is the most common: price. Sustainable practices in general tend to have a high startup cost. For example, we learned in our Frog's Leap case about how expensive it was to set up solar panels. I also learned about another example of just how expensive the practices can get for some companies. On the right, we have two images, both of self-driving vehicles introduced by Walmart. On the top, we have a cargo truck, and on the bottom, we have a normal truck. When researching, I learned that Walmart signed a $1 trillion contract with Ford and a technology company called Gatik to make the trucks from the top image. Why was it so expensive? Well, if you look at the image in the top right, you can see a portion of the back of the truck which is all black. This piece of the truck is created out of long sheets of carbon fiber. If you aren't aware of what carbon fiber is, it's a lightweight material that is very expensive. These trucks actually have some of the longest sheets of carbon fiber in the world. So, to refer back to the image, each face of the back end of the truck are single carbon fiber sheets. And along with the self-driving technology, it came to a high price tag. The reason I use this case is to highlight that for large companies, it can become really expensive to try and make areas of your company sustainable. We can see this impact as well for smaller companies, even though they would perform something like this at a smaller scale. They also have less capital invest, which is why price is a barrier for most companies. As for the benefits of sustainability, there's the likes of an increase of customers, more efficient and profitable practices like we see in Frog Leap solar panels, and an increase in quality. There are many more benefits, but these are the ones I focus on in my paper. To further present an argument for sustainable procurement, I look at two companies: Frog Leap's Winery, which we are familiar with, and Disney, which we have all heard of. I use frog leaps to talk about the environmental management system created by co-founder John Williams and how it became very important for the wine industry when they started to face natural issues which required sustainable practices to be implemented. As I mentioned earlier, I like to use the example of how FLW installed solar panels. And although they were expensive, they were able to sell the extra electricity produced from the panels in order to cover all the costs required for the solar panels, rendering them free electricity. The last thing I use for this case is to talk about the lowest group of consumers, which were an environmentally friendly group of consumers who chose FLW's wine once they understood exactly how much they focused on sustainability. After this, I then transitioned to talk about the quality benefits from sustainable practices. Disney created an organization called Responsible Sourcing, which set a standard for suppliers in which they had to have a certain level of sustainable farming as well as fair pay for workers. Disney states that this organization has allowed them to have the most innovative, highest quality, and most cost effective business solutions, which can be seen as a motivator for any other company to adopt a strategy like this in order to become both sustainable as well as having cheaper and higher quality products. Now, I will transition to the second general question. All right, so the second general question I will look into is what methods of sustainable procurement provide the best results while also being the cheapest? In order to answer this question, I broke it down into two targeted audiences. The first was a large business, and the second was a smaller company. What I found from my research is that there are many methods for sustainable procurement for large companies, like how I talked about Walmart revamping their method of transportation. And I also learned about a method Starbucks uses called cafe practices. These practices are a group of 4 criteria that Starbucks has set for their suppliers in order to try and make their procurement a win-win scenario. These criteria have been in place for around 16 years now, and they have allowed the workers of the suppliers to have a fair pay, as well as having safe standards to work in. I then use this idea to transition into how sustainable procurement can help developing countries. According to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, developing countries have difficulty achieving sustainability due to the lack of resources. As mentioned, the cafe practices allowed the workers of the suppliers to have more income, which in turn allows them to be able to provide for their families, as well as having more income circulating in their economy. These practices also allow these countries to learn and gain hands-on experience with the sustainable methods Starbucks is requiring them to use, which benefits the country as a whole. With this information, I came to the understanding that it is very beneficial for both companies and the countries in which they operate to adopt these sustainable methods because they help spread awareness of the effect of these methods. Finishing off with the first portion of this question, I then looked at what methods a smaller company could use to become sustainable. Using what I learned from the Starbucks cafe practices, I recommended a method of sustainable procurement that would be beneficial for smaller companies. This example I use in my paper is in reference to a local grocery store. I first explained how it would be impossible for this local grocery store to demand its suppliers to transition to sustainable practices since they don't have the size to change the farmers' practices. With this, I recommended that the local grocery store start with sustainably procuring one product, an avocado. I then state that the grocery store should monitor how much their profits and customer base change when they sustainably source this one product. If they see a net gain in profits or an increase in consumers, then they can sustainably procure another product. Through trial and error, this small grocery store will be able to have nearly all of their products sustainably procured over time. All right, so what I conclude from all the research and time I put into my paper is that sustainable procurement can be attained by every company. When I say this, I don't mean fully sustainable companies. I mean that every company can have a claim to being sustainable in some sense because they can also start out small. I also learned that sustainable procurement tends to have a positive impact on companies, not only for how much it is appreciated by consumers nowadays, but also by how much it can help suppliers outside of the company. All right, well, that draws the end to my presentation. Thank you guys for listening, and I wish you good luck on your finals.